This is not a conventional ghost story. It has a paranormal entity involved in it, but it turned out to be a noble one as I found out. It was back in 1996, November 17th, when I was 21. I was on my way home to Harnai to visit my grandparents' house in the Konkan region. I had left Mumbai late in the afternoon and had a flat tire on the way, so I was delayed unexpectedly. Harnai is a famous beach village in Konkan. There are two routes to go to Harnai, one via Dapoli, where you take NH3 up to Parananaka, and the other via Goregaon Embut Mondangad Kelshi and Jarl, where you leave NH3 at Toll, a village, not a toll, and take an inner route after Goregaon. This is a short but pretty deserted and lonely route at night. As I was getting late, I took this route. It was about 11:30 p.m. when I was on the outskirts of Mondangad on my way to Kelshi. I was surprised to see a girl waving her hand at my car. There was a small hill on the right side of the road and a house at some distance from where the girl may have popped up. Nevertheless, I stopped my car. The girl was about 15 to 16 years old. Coming close to the passenger side seat, she knocked on the glass. I pulled down the glass and looked at her. She was a strikingly sweet-looking girl, and there was a feeling of calmness on her face. She was wearing a salwar kameez with a dupatta wrapped around her ears to prevent the cold. I asked her what was the matter, to which she replied, "Malan Jarl Yala Jha, urgent Santos ka? I need to go to Anjarl urgently, will you drop me?" I was bored on a long drive of about 7 hours and the delay anyway, and since Anjarl was on my way, I decided to give her a ride. At least I had found someone to talk to rather than just listening to songs and driving. She sat on the passenger seat, and we moved on. We started talking after some time. Her name, she told me, was Ratna, and she had gone to see her uncle at Mondangad. She had missed the last bus that leaves at 10 in the night and had to reach Anjarl urgently as she was in 10th and had an early morning school. I was taken aback completely and asked her how her uncle allowed her to travel alone at this hour of the day, to which she replied that she wanted to leave early, but her uncle said he would drop her after dinner and that he caught a fever suddenly, so she had no option. We kept on chatting on our way about different topics. In about an hour, we had crossed Kelshi and were approaching Anjarl when she asked me to stop the car. I stopped and looked around. On my right side, there was a beach, and on my left was a small hill. Where was this girl going to go? She got down from the car. I asked her where she was going, to which she replied that her home was just behind the hill. I offered to walk with her to the safety of her house, to which she replied very curtly, "Nai, ith pariantak, punai, punabhadan katatari me tula, jatu. No, up till here only, not ahead. I will meet you sometime again. Go away." I noticed the change in her voice. She was pointing towards Anjarl village. Her face was motionless. I was about to say something, but she gave me such a look that I decided not to argue more with her. I got back in the car and moved on. I reached my grandparents' house in another half an hour, and they both were surprised to see me reaching so late. I narrated to them the whole incident and my encounter with Ratna. They both warned me not to stop there ever as that area is known for being haunted at night. As I didn't believe in the paranormal world then, I turned a deaf ear to it and went to bed. I had a couple of rest days and visited Suvarnadurga Fort, which is an island fort like Janjira and Sinhadurg. I had made a few friends on my earlier visits to Harnai, and we decided to have a day trip to Anjarl beach. After some time on the beach, as we were relaxing, I saw a figure coming down the hill. It was a man of about 40 coming down on the road. He was surprised to see us as Anjarl beach is a very lonely one. I asked him where he stayed, to which he replied that he stayed on the other side of the hill. Something struck my mind. That was the exact location Ratna had mentioned. I casually inquired about his family, to which he replied that he had a wife and 2 sons. No daughter. I asked him if there was another home nearby, to which he replied that his was the only home there and the rest were all fields. I asked him if he knew about a girl called Ratna staying nearby. He gave me a weird look the moment I asked about her. Dada, Ratna Mazumulgi Hoti, 10 Varshas Ali Geli T. Ratna was my daughter. She passed away 10 years ago. I had the shock of my life. I could not utter a word for a few moments. Slowly, I gathered myself. How was it possible that the girl I met a couple of days back was dead 10 years ago? I told him that I had dropped Ratna at that very point 2 nights back. He looked at me weirdly. I narrated to him the whole story of how I picked her up at Mondangad after her uncle suddenly got ill and she missed the last bus. He listened to it carefully and told me the other side of the story. Ratna was indeed coming from Mondongat on the night she had died. His brother was at Mondongat then, who had got ill, and Ratna had hitchhiked a ride in a car after she had missed the bus. The car had met an accident at that very spot, as the driver was tired and fell asleep while driving. He survived with multiple injuries, but Ratna had died on the spot. I was still not convinced. It was possible that the girl I was talking about was a different girl with the same name, Ratna. I walked along with him to his house on the other side of the hill. The moment I entered his house, I saw a girl's photograph on the wall with a flower garland around it. No doubt it was the same girl whom I had met a couple of days earlier. She was the daughter of the farmer who had passed away 10 years ago. As I was standing there, suddenly a thought crossed my mind. What would have happened had I insisted on walking her to the house? How would she have reacted to that? I had met her on 17th November, and to my astonishment, her brother said that it was the same day that she had met her and 10 years earlier. I had cold sweat down my spine. I inquired carefully with the family if anyone had encountered or felt her presence ever around, or if anyone had seen her like I did in the last 10 years, to which everyone replied negative. I made a few inquiries in Anjarl and Harnai village as well as in Kalshi during my stay if anyone had given a ride to a girl from Mondongat. I could not find a single person who had met her ever. After my vacations were over, I drove back the same road to my home. I could not separate her thoughts from my mind and tried to have clarification as much as possible. I had no doubt in my mind that the girl I had met was the farmer's daughter, as I could make it clearly from her photograph. The details she had told me about her activities on the night she died were matching perfectly with the night 10 years ago. Some questions which remained in my mind were: where was she in these 10 years? What made her come back suddenly after 10 years? Of all the people, why did she meet me that day exactly 10 years after her death? Why did she say, "I will meet you again"? Was I supposed to have another encounter with her? I was sure of one thing: she didn't have any intention to hurt me or scare me. Had that been her intention, she had all the opportunity, as I was with her for an hour or so. As days passed on, slowly the memories of my encounter with Ratna faded. I had joined a new job and was really busy with my office and other activities. I had not visited Harnai for a couple of years now, though I had met my grandparents when they had visited us in Mumbai. It was very difficult for me to find vacation from office, but this time around, I managed to get a week's leave from office and decided to take a trip to Harnai. The moment I thought of a trip to Harnai, Ratna's memories came rushing back. Will I meet her again this time? What if I meet her again? What should I ask her? What would she do if at all I meet her? I was not afraid and was now looking forward to the encounter. I left Mumbai late, keeping in mind to reach Mondongat by about 11 in the night, but this time, there were no signs of her. I waited at that spot for 10 minutes, anticipating she would make an appearance, but to no avail. Thinking that it was a chance encounter, I moved on. Another year passed, and I happened to visit Harnai again as my grandfather had organized a get-together of all family members at his home. My parents had left earlier, and I was supposed to join a couple of days later. I was once again on my way to Harnai, leaving Mumbai late in the day. Busy with my daily schedule, Ratna's thought had been out of my mind for a while now. I left NH3 at Tolpada and had reached Mondongat at about 11:30, and as I reached the same spot where I had picked her up about 3 years back, I saw her again. This time, though, she was not waving down to me, but was expecting me to stop. As she approached my car, I looked at my watch, and the date on it showed 17th November. She calmly opened the door of the car and got in without a word. It was the same salwar kameez she was wearing and the same calm expression as it was 3 years ago. I was not scared at all at her presence because I was sure she didn't mean to hurt me. As we moved on, she asked me, "Me kanhi tulak lala, bhiti nivathatula? You know about me now, are you not scared?" I told her that I was surprised to know about her but was not scared, as I knew she didn't intend to hurt me at all. She nodded understandingly but warned me, though, that everyone is not like her and some are really nasty ones. I had so many questions in my mind. After my first encounter with her, I had taken a keen interest in the paranormal world and had read lots of stuff and met a few people in this field. And now I had a paranormal entity sitting right next to me in my car. It was a situation of its own kind. I started asking her questions one after the other, and she answered all of them with detailed information. The information she gave me was so detailed that I cannot give it all here. As I had already read many books on this subject, it was a confirmation of what I had read from her. She told me what exactly happens at the time of death and immediately afterward. I asked her where she was for 10 years after her death and our first encounter, to which she replied that she was in Bhuvarlok in the form of Sukshma Sharir, a small physique, which is made up of thin air. Why did she choose me to communicate with after 10 years? She replied that it was because I was the first person with whom she could communicate at a subconscious level. There was some more relation between us that she did not disclose. It is not possible for everyone to interact with a paranormal entity, and it's the other way around as well. Paranormal entities cannot communicate with everyone. Why could I not see her last year on my way to Harnai? She could not take a human form that night, though she was able to see me waiting for her to appear. How long would she be in this state and make appearances? She said her lifespan was supposed to be a few more years in the mortal world, and because she had died in an accident, she had to spend those remaining years before she could progress to the next lok, which is Swargalok, or be reborn in Bhulok, which is the mortal world, unless she's instructed otherwise. I asked her how long was the span, but she replied that she didn't know the exact amount of time. What if I wanted to meet her sometime or somewhere else? She said that she had no restriction of place, but she could not meet me frequently whenever I wanted to, as it would be interfering with the strict restrictions to which every paranormal entity is bound, and it would prolong her stay in Bhuvarlok. We had reached the spot where she had died, and she recounted the whole incident to me, how it had happened. She had died instantly after she was thrown out of the car after the accident, and her head had hit a stone. We continued our conversation for some time. She had been helping people near death to get used to paranormal life after their death, as this was her assigned task. After some time, she said, "It's time for her to go now." I asked her, "Malapunabetchil, will you meet me again?" She replied that she can meet me anywhere as she had said earlier, but I have to be very careful to be alone, and it can be preferably after evening. Also, I have to ensure that the meetings are not frequent. I assured her that I would not want to interfere in her world and would be glad to meet her when it is possible for her and she herself appears before me again. I got in my car and moved on. I had met her for the second time. I didn't have any encounter with Ratna for a year or so after that. My dad had retired from office, and we were looking to get a new home in the suburbs. We had almost finalized an apartment and were about to sign a deal. After discussion with the property dealer for the price and the bank regarding the loan, I came back home exhausted after a long day. I have a habit of taking a walk after dinner. As I was too tired that day, I just went to the terrace of my apartment for a stroll. As I entered the terrace, there was nobody there. I began walking up and down on the terrace, and as I started my third round, I saw someone standing on the other corner. I wondered who it could be as I had the door behind me and was certain that whoever it was didn't come that way. Walking at a normal pace, I reached over near that person, and it was none other than Ratna. She had appeared on my terrace this time. I was happy to see her again, but before I said anything, she said very curtly, "Nakojos Tyagarat, Tulahexanga Yalalaj, Tijagachongli Nituziasadi. Don't go there. I came today only to tell you this. It is not a good place for you." I was startled. Why did she say that? It was a really nice apartment, and we had bargained a lot with the property dealer, and I had taken enough pain to get a loan from the banks, and now this girl was putting me off. I asked her why she insisted on me not taking that apartment, but she refused to give me any details. She flatly told me that it was not good for me and my family, that's all. I could sense a definite concern and urge in her voice about stopping us from moving there. That moment itself, I decided to cancel the deal. I told her I wouldn't go there, at which point she smiled and just went away to the other corner of the terrace, and as I was watching, she just mixed away with thin air and disappeared. Later on, I came to know that the previous owner of the apartment had committed suicide, and prior to that, there was a murder that had occurred in that apartment. Perhaps that was the reason Ratna wanted to keep me away from there. I had a few more encounters with Ratna. I asked her once if I could take a picture of her, but she refused. She had told me many details of life beyond death and different kinds of paranormal entities and about the powerhouse we call God. My wife also happened to see her once before we were married. I clearly remember the date as it was 10th of September 2005. The last time we had seen her. She told me that time had come for her to move to a different life and we wouldn't meet again. She blessed us and left without ever coming back. To this date, I have never seen her again. I hope wherever she is, in whatever state, she stays happy. I wonder what it was between the two of us that kept her bringing back again and again. I only guess that there was some sort of relation between us for sure. When I was in my early 20s, My date and I decided to go to the Sail Inn in West Sacramento to play pool. We'd been there before and enjoyed speaking with the bartender. I can't recall her name, but she was a beautiful, engaging woman. This particular night, we walked in and noticed the pool table was occupied. There was a man and woman shooting a game, so my date bought us some drinks while I watched. After a few minutes, the man noticed me and struck up a conversation with me. When my date came over with our drinks, the man asked us if we wanted to shoot a game with them. It didn't occur to me at the time that his female companion hadn't yet said anything. We said yes, so he racked up the balls, and we played against them. During the game, we introduced ourselves, and right after the man began asking me some personal questions that started to bother me, like where did I live, had my date and I been dating long, did we live together, etc. I noticed the man and his friend kept looking at each other. I became increasingly uncomfortable, even though the rest of the conversation was benign and pleasant in nature. Weirdly, the woman still hadn't said anything. When the game was over, the man asked us if we wanted to leave with them to go to another bar down the street. At first I didn't say anything. The guy asked us again, saying they discovered a cool bar not too far from where we were. My date and I looked at each other, and before he could say anything, I blurted out, "No thanks, we have dinner plans." We in fact did not have plans, but my date didn't argue with me. I think he saw the look of panic on my face. We both grabbed our jackets and got the hell out of there. By the time we walked out the door, the hair was literally standing up on the back of my neck. When we got back to my truck, my date asked me what was wrong. I told him I got a horrible feeling from those people and just knew we had to get away from them. I told him it was weird that he asked us to leave with them when he didn't check with his date first. He shrugged and said okay. I think he thought I was crazy. A few days later, when I opened up the afternoon paper, there was an article in there about a woman from West Sacramento who'd been found murdered. I didn't think anything of it until I got to the page where the article was continued, and the picture of the woman practically leapt off the page at me. It was the beautiful bartender from the Sail Inn. Apparently she'd been kidnapped, raped, and killed the very night I was there with my date. I was totally creeped out and thought what a crazy coincidence that was, and how sad it was that she had died so horribly. It wasn't until a month or so later that I realized why I had gotten so upset that night. A man and woman had just been arrested for the bartender's murder, along with the murders of several other people, 4 of whom were couples. There on the front page of the Sacramento Bee were the pictures of the killers, Gerald and Charlene Gallego, the very couple who invited my date and I to go with them to another bar. And apparently, this was one of the ruses they used to get their victims into their van. My heart did flip-flops in my chest as I read the article. Not only had we been targeted as their next serial killer victims, when we turned them down, they selected another target because of me. I have lived with both relief and guilt all my life because of this. Intellectually I know it's not my fault the bartender died, but I've always wondered how different the world would have been had she been able to live out her life, even though I would have been gone myself. Needless to say, that was the end of my bar date experiences, for a long time. About 7 years ago I got an invitation to attend my cousin's dinner party. I have never seen my cousin before and only spoke to him on the phone. I was surprised that his family unexpectedly invited me after all these years. The invitation had an uncharted address that the GPS was unfamiliar with. I used a map and pinned its location. As I'm driving I tend to notice how far I ventured off from civilization. Trees after trees, farms after farms. Where the fuck am I going? I finally found a similar address that might be it. Approaching the house I notice how dull and dreary it looks. It's completely engulfed with leaves and branches. This can't be it, I said to myself. As soon as I entered the rocky driveway my aunt and uncle came out to greet me. They seemed excited and welcoming. Walking into the house I asked where my cousin is. Answering immediately, he went to run a few errands, he should be back later. We spent the whole couple of hours talking about my mother and family. My aunt made delicious homemade pot roast that I finished off in minutes. After dinner, we played an enduring game of Uno. It was surprisingly fun and competitive. When we finished Uno it was almost dark and still no sign of my cousin. Regardless, I had to leave. It was almost dark and I would have trouble getting out of this dreadful place. My GPS was ineffective, so I asked my aunt and uncle the most efficient way onto the highway. They gave me a puzzled look. "I thought you were staying the night?" I told them I couldn't because I had work tomorrow and couldn't afford to miss another day. "It's much better if you leave tomorrow morning, trust me you'll get lost." I shrugged it off and told them not to worry, I'm an adept navigator. I could get out of the Sahara Desert. Looking aggravated, they strongly advised me to stay the night for my own sake. At this point, I was getting pissed and irritable. I sighed, "Fine, I'll stay the night, but I have to get up early for work." Both of them seemed strangely ecstatic that I was staying the night. As soon as they went to go get my bed sheets and pillows, I ran out the door and got in my car. I hastily pulled out of the driveway. It took me a while, but I found my way out of that depressing place. I got home an hour later than expected. It was 11 and I didn't want to wake my parents up. Climbing my fence and entering the back door, I noticed the kitchen lights were on. As soon as I took my first step in the door, I see my mom sitting there looking impatient. "Where were you?" she asked. "I was at Aunt Deborah's." "You knew this? Then why did she call saying you never arrived?" Till this day I never knew who I visited. Doug Averill grew up as one of 8 boys on his parents' sprawling dude ranch, the Flathead Lake Lodge, in rural Montana. As a teen, the Averill boys ran wild. "We rode around as a little gang of cowboys," he remembers. They'd saddle up and head off to check cattle on the 3 giant tracts of land the family managed, which formed a triangle around some of the state's most remote rangelands. One summer in the 1960s, the brothers came across a ghastly sight. There, on the ground, were 3 dead cows neatly arranged in a circle. No obvious wounds were visible, but their reproductive organs had been removed. But there was never any blood. It was almost surgical removal, Averill remembers. During this decade, America was obsessed with aliens, and write-ups in the local newspapers posited that perhaps this was the work of extraterrestrials. People mused that aliens had taken the reproductive organs for testing. But one day, Averill and his friends came across a lance in their path. Attached to it was a cryptic note with a threatening message. "That's when we thought, it's gotta be people doing this," he says. Then things got really strange. Over the next few days, a series of odd events unfolded. First, the brothers stopped in at a local bar to grab a hamburger, leaving their horses in the back of a stock truck. The horses were packed in tightly, and the Averills were only gone for a few minutes. When they came back, the horse packed into the middle of the truck was mysteriously out, with no signs of a struggle. "We had no idea how they possibly could have gotten that horse unloaded without unloading all the others," he says. The next day, a new wrangler on the ranch fell off his horse and was badly injured. They'd all been riding together, but not a single other member of the crew saw the accident. "It was the weirdest thing," Averill says. "The man's injuries were so severe that he was left permanently disabled." Finally, the last terrible thing happened. An old camp cook drove out to meet the brothers and ride for a day. But when he arrived, the tailgate on his stock truck had somehow gone missing, even though it had been there when he'd loaded up. His horse, Betsy, had fallen out of the truck and been dragged behind the vehicle for who knows how long. They had to put her down on the spot. To be honest, it just killed him to see what had happened to Betsy. "We probably should have put him down, too," remembers Averill. "Those 3 events were just boom, 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 3 things in a row that were so weird all tied together, because they were right after we saw that spear," he remembers. 3 things, like the 3 dead cows left in a circle. Averill used to tell the stories from that summer around the campfire quite a lot. But over the years, he's gotten new stories, and so they've been shifted out of rotation. Besides, they're awfully grim. But he recently got a call about a downed bull, a buffalo. It was out in one of the most remote parts of his ranch. A neighbor had seen a pack of 16 wolves, and normally, wolves don't bother buffalo, but 16 of them? "I thought, well, maybe." He went to investigate. There, lying in a snow-covered field, was the bull. But there were no bullet holes or teeth marks or gashes on its corpse. Even stranger, scavenging animals and birds hadn't touched it. Not even the buzzards, which is really unusual, he says. One other thing was amiss: its reproductive organs were gone. And there wasn't a single footprint in the snow around it, or anywhere along the mile-long walk into the ranch from the nearest road. Ask Averill whether he thinks he's dealing with aliens or humans, and he'll tell you he's pretty sure it's humans. "But I'd rather it was aliens," he adds. After that summer back in the 60s, seeing what humans were capable of, he'd pick aliens any day.